When I started teaching over 15 years ago, I had no idea that most of my students would turn out to be older beginners. But that's how it went, and they've become my favorite kind of people to teach. We like the same music, classic rock, folk, stuff basically from the 60s to the 90s. And most importantly, they're taking lessons because they want to, not because their parents told them to. And when I say older, I mean anybody my age and up. So 30s, 40s, 50s, I've even taught a 92-year-old. And there are a lot of great things about being an older learner, but there are also a few roadblocks or things to look out for. And as somebody who has seen firsthand pretty much everything that might hinder your guitar journey, both in my private lessons and through my channel here, my online community, I want to share my comprehensive list of pretty much all those things. And I don't want to waste your time, so let's get straight to it. There are 6 main challenges that older beginners run into. There's finger pain, stiffness, arthritis, a slower learning curve, rhythm and coordination, physical endurance and posture, information overwhelm, and what I call technology headaches. And if any of those sound familiar, stick around. We're going to go through them one by one. Real quick before we get into it, if you haven't grabbed my free beginner guitar ebook, the link is below. It's packed with the exact chord shapes and simple songs that I use with my older students. And if you'd rather see how it all fits together, there's also a link to a 10-day free trial for my all access pass, which we can talk more about later. Now, point number 1, finger pain, stiffness, and arthritis. There are 2 kinds of finger pain: fingertip pain and everything else. And fingertip pain is a good kind of pain. Your fingertips are gonna hurt a little bit for a couple weeks, maybe a month, but as you press down on the strings, calluses form, your nerve endings kind of get used to it and they don't fire off as much, and the pain goes away. That is a growing pain that every beginner goes through. But every other kind of pain is not good. Some might be conditions like arthritis, and there's no avoiding that. I'm not a medical professional. I can't cure arthritis, but we can work around it in a few ways. Some involve adapting your guitar to making it easier to play, and others involve warming up properly and making sure that you're playing in a way that suits your hands. First, we'll talk about the adaptations. Whenever my students have trouble playing chord shapes, my first recommendation is to get lighter guitar strings. I have perfectly fine hands and I still prefer using lighter strings. They're not a crutch. In my opinion, they actually sound better and they make your guitar easier to play. Some people like thicker strings, and you know what? Good for them. But that makes the guitar harder to play. Another thing you might want to do is get your guitar set up properly so that the strings are closer to the fretboard and that so overall it's easier to play. And if all else fails, you can always try a different guitar. An electric guitar is really, really easy to play compared to an acoustic. Nylon string guitars have kind of softer, rounder strings. You could get a 3/4 size guitar, which is like a smaller guitar that still sounds the same, but it's easier to manage, especially if you're a smaller person. But let's say that you got your guitar figured out. There are a few other things that you can do. The first one, this comes from my physio, Emily. She helped me make my guitar health kit, which is on my website. And it's simple. You just run your hands under warm water before you play. And then you open and close your hands slowly 20 times. This gets the fluid, I think it's called synovial fluid, into your joints. It gets it moving so that you're not going in cold. It's kind of like revving the engine before you put it in gear, right? And once your hands are warm, you can do a few warm-up exercises. And I have a bunch on my website, and I'll put a link to them. These will get your fingers moving and it'll keep them limber. There are also adaptations that we can make to our chord shapes. I made a lesson where we substituted all the most common chords with ones that are specifically for stiff fingers. One of my students has arthritis, and we devised a bunch of ways for her to still play the songs that she wants. So I'll put a link to that down below too. Now, point number 2, the slower learning curve. A lot of people tell me that they're worried they won't be able to keep up or learn as fast as others. But here's the thing, guitar isn't a race or a competition. Even if someone learns quickly, there'll still be somebody faster. Nobody's the best or the worst. We're all just here to have fun and enjoy guitar. Mechanically, however, older beginners often have a harder time memorizing chord shapes, progressions, and keeping track of where they are in a song. Some students they tell me that they've been at it for years, but they still can't play a full song. And then they find my lessons, and we fix that by simplifying the process. We start simple, and we actually start with a song right away. I guarantee if you take my lesson for Horse with No Name, it's just 2 chords, 1 simple movement, you'll be strumming along within 10 minutes, even if you've never picked up a guitar before. We start with the simplest version of a song, but we actually play the song, and then we can always build from there. A lot of people prepare. They spend all this time preparing. I gotta master all the chords, gotta get my rhythm perfect, and then one day I'll be ready to play songs. But that approach keeps you stuck. With guitar, you're playing songs right away, even in the simplest way, kind of like drawing the outline before you color it in. That's the method I use, and you can try it in my beginner song lessons. I also have a crash course. It's completely free on my website. I'll put a link to that down below, so you can experience those small wins and that daily progress that's going to keep you motivated. Now, number 3, rhythm and coordination. A lot of people struggle to strum and change chords while they keep a steady beat. Others have trouble singing and playing at the same time. Rhythm is the key to sounding musical. Any hiccup and the whole thing unravels. Music has a pulse, like a beat, and if you can't stick with it, the song just falls apart. And having to do that creates this feeling of pressure or always trying to keep up. It makes people overthink, and it makes the rhythm kind of fall apart. But the steps to get better are simple. You just have to take them in the right order. And I'm not talking about metronomes. The biggest issue I see is people learning strumming patterns, downstrokes and upstrokes and all that, before they can feel the groove or the feeling of the song. So let's take Country Roads, for example. Most lessons jump right to a complex strumming pattern. Instead, we can still learn that song starting with a simpler, like root down, root down. It still feels like the song, but I'm not stuck focusing on the right order of things to do. I'm focusing on how the song actually feels, and that's going to come off in your playing. That's the thing you want to get first, and then we can add the details later. In my method, in my courses, we even start before that with clapping exercises, clapping along to songs, learning to feel and copy rhythms. And that's a missing step that so many people skip over. And when you skip over it, it's not something you're just going to magically get as you're focusing on upstrokes and downstrokes and getting all confused in that way. I've had huge success teaching this way, and it's one of the biggest things that I'd like to share. If you want to go deeper, I have a full rhythm training method in chapter 3 of my Learn Guitar Once and For All course that takes you from 2 left feet to somebody who can actually groove. Now, point 4, physical endurance. The 2 biggest issues are getting tired quickly and building tension in the wrong places. And this one's simple. Shorter, more frequent practice sessions are the key. Play for 10 or 15 minutes, take a break, go for a walk, then play again later. That's way better than sitting down for an hour straight, and you're actually going to be retaining the information better because you keep on going to it. It's just something in the way that our brain works. Also, you'll want to make sure that your posture is good. In my free crash course, we go over this in detail, but the biggest thing is keeping your guitar tilted slightly up so that you're not cramping your neck to look down. Your strumming arm is supporting the guitar and your chord hand can move freely. If you're not sure about your setup, like I said, my crash course, my other courses, we go through all of that, making sure that you feel comfortable when you're playing guitar. Number 5, information overwhelm. I'd say about a quarter of the questions that I get by email, in my community, or in the comments are about not knowing what to practice or where to start. There's just so much online. And even if the perfect lesson exists for you, finding it is going to be a challenge, and you might not even know what to look for. I recommend working backward. Start with your goals. What do you want to do on guitar? From there, it's easier to see which skills you'll need, and that's where a teacher comes in. I always start my lessons by asking what somebody wants to play, and then we kind of reverse engineer a plan for them. Of course, everybody's different, and that's why I have so many lessons up here on YouTube, is to try to help everybody in their own way. So taking like a full step-by-step course or working with a good local guitar teacher can definitely help give you that boost in the start. And when I say good teacher, I do really mean that. Not all are created equal. Find somebody who not only can they play well, but they can explain things just as clearly. Now, the last point has to do with technology challenges, that tech headache, because sometimes the chord charts are too small, the buttons are hard to find, the navigation just doesn't make sense. And, even if you invest in an online course, maybe you have trouble logging in. And unfortunately, the world has digitized, ultimately finding lessons that are designed for you. If you've stuck with this video for this long, maybe you've learned from me before, that I make the graphics large, high contrast so that they're easy to see. I've written down enough stuff for people in their 70s. I know exactly what works, and as the resident tech expert in my family, the guy my dad calls when he can't figure something out on his computer or his iPad or whatever, I've tried to make everything on my website simple and intuitive. My philosophy is, if you can find and click a video on YouTube, you can use my online courses. And I guess this is a good time to mention that I do have a full experience on my website that covers everything that we've talked about step by step. There's bite-sized lessons, big, easy to read charts, clear videos, no tech headaches, no 50 different course confusion. You can just dive into what you need to do, and you can even message me directly if you get stuck. In fact, one of my older students, Chris, described it as boomer proof. Those are his words, not mine. But all jokes aside, if you want to give it a try, there's a free 10-day trial of my all access pass. There's no commitment, no payment up front. You just try it and you see what you think. I'm going to put a link down below. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this lesson. If you want more tips, tricks, or songs to play along with, I have hundreds of videos here on the channel. Subscribe, click the like button. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Have a fun time practicing, and I'll see you soon.